In a recent interview, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders suggested that her administration rejected a course on African American history to prevent students from being taught hatred of America.
There's a little bit of controversy right now. There's an accusation that the Arkansas Education Department removed credit for controversial AP African American Studies course. Let me just read to you what the NAACP said and let you respond. They said the Arkansas State Conference of the NAACP is appalled at the recent decision of Arkansas Department of Education to make a hasteful decision at the final hour to do away with AP African American Studies. Is that really what happened there?
Absolutely not. And one of the things that we have talked about so much, and Dana, I think the point that you made a minute ago about the staggering numbers that we're seeing across this country, we've got to get back to the basics of teaching math, of teaching reading, writing, and American history. And we cannot perpetuate a lie to our students and push this propaganda leftist agenda, teaching our kids to hate America and hate one another. It's one of the reasons that we put into law banning things like indoctrination and CRT. We want our kids to receive a quality education, and we want to make sure that every student has access to it and a pathway to prosperity, and that's exactly what we're doing here in the state of Arkansas.
It was earlier this month when the Arkansas Department of Education gave 2 days' notice that the advanced placement course on African American Studies would no longer be accepted for credit. The Sanders administration also said the state will not cover the $90 for the final exam, even though it covers that amount for other AP courses. Listen, I'm looking at this, Dr. Malveaux, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? She talks about teaching math and she talks about teaching English, but it doesn't sound like she wants to teach any history.
Well, she doesn't mind teaching European history. The state of Arkansas does have a course in AP European history that they do pay the $90 for students to take the exam on. So if you want to learn about America, why would you give preference to teaching European history except for your own hypocrisy? Sarah Huckabee Sanders came into office when she was elected, talking smack about critical race theory, of which she doesn't know what it is. But she said, we can't have critical race theory. 44 states, my sister, have actually introduced legislation to keep from teaching anything that has to do with race. Only about 28, I forget the number, but 20-some states have passed, but 44 states, that's the majority of states. What's happened essentially is that the conservative right has taken over language. So critical race theory is a buzzword for race awareness. No one is teaching a legal concept in K through 12 or even beyond. This is simply hatred and not wanting people to know the truth. What's ironic about this, in Elaine, Arkansas, 200 Black men were lynched simply because they attempted to come together. They were sharecroppers and they wanted to get a better price for their produce. So they tried to come together and organize. Someone spread the lie that a white communist was organizing them. They were organizing themselves in a Black church. 200 people were lynched. No, she doesn't want young people to know that story, but young people will surprise you because young white people want to know the stories too. They want to know what the origins of this are. I chair Push Excel, which is the education arm of Rainbow Push, Reverend Jackson's organization. And we have 2 young people who come to talk to us, brilliant young, they were high school seniors last year. And one of those young ladies said, I think it's as important for me to learn about what happened in Chicago with the Red Summer of 1919, where people were lynched and shot and all that, as it is for me to learn algebra. That's what many of our young people are thinking. I want to know the truth. But Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her ilk do not want to know the truth. No one is saying, it hurts your feelings. Being enslaved hurts somebody's feelings.
Right.
So talk about hurting feelings, it's ridiculous. She's just wrong, but she's been wrong. I mean, she's a spawn of wrong. Let me stop.
You know, we talk about learning history. That's what Dr. Malveaux was talking about. Renita, when we talk about learning history, there are a lot of people who are learning history on their own in freedom schools across the country, setting up in their own right these schools where people can learn. It is a shame that it would have to come to that. But when we look at solutions like that, you know, what are your thoughts about these types of schools and the fact that different communities across the country have had to take education into their own hands?
Well, as a Black person, I'm not familiar with any other Black families who ever believe that all of the education you would need about Black history you would receive in schools. I mean, this is terrible, obviously, but I don't think that anybody was under the illusion that you would receive proper Black history education just from school. We've always had to know that we have had to talk to our elders, we've had to talk to folks in our family to get the true education that we need. Now, this is interesting for a few reasons because some schools in Arkansas have said that they are going to teach AP Black history, regardless of what the state says. And so I'm glad to see these schools stand up and say, hey, we're going to do what's best for these students. We want them to be able to compete in the modern workforce. And a part of that is knowing and understanding the history of this country and understanding different perspectives just as much as it is knowing math and knowing science. And Arkansas, out of all places, should be willing to teach AP history. This may be history that maybe Sarah Huckabee Sanders does not know, but she probably needs to learn some history because Arkansas was at the center of being one of the first to integrate schools in 1957. So they have lots of actual history right there. I would suspect living history that they really should be teaching. And so to your point, the more that they try to tell these students what they can't learn, all it's going to do is drive those students to want to learn more on their own. And I think that all of this that is happening across the country is just going to be, it's going to be reminiscent of what happened in the 80s when the government started putting the parental advisory on CDs, and all that did was made teenagers want to listen to that music more.
You know, Dr. Dubinga, I did a search when I put in the word slave earlier today, and it popped up, did slaves learn a lot or have a hard time while they were slaves? Because these are the discussions that are happening across the country, whether or not slavery was good or bad. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the fact that you really can't get around teaching history altogether with keeping major parts of it out in telling the story. How do you think teachers can get around it, or can that even actually happen?
Well, first of all, somebody who does work in schools across the country, charter, public, and private schools, and have been doing this for over 20 years, I'm very adamant about the fact that teaching accuracy is not activism. I had a situation where a white teacher told me she was doing a project on African civilizations. This was in Maryland, and the kids were all in majority white school. The kids were all involved and active about the project. But when they submitted the final pictures that they did of the African kings, they were all white. And the teacher was shocked, and she asked, why did they do this? And so it's because the students said they didn't want to get in trouble by being viewed as being racist. So this idea that whiteness is the center is causing a true distortion of history that is throwing everybody off. And one of the things I talk about in my students at American University, they get so angry when they find out the truth, when they find out the real things that have happened that they were never taught in school. I was showing pictures of postcards of the lynchings that were happening back in the days. And one student started getting really upset in school because she was like, wait a minute, that's my street. Like, that's the block I grew up on, and she never knew that history. So every single day, and when we deny these students their history, when they find out the truth, they get really upset. Axios did a study that said majority of white Republican students want to know the true history. But one of the things I talk about in my book, Lies About Black People, I have some poetry in there, and some of the lines that I have in there, when I'm talking about us, I'm like, yo, where were your laws when I was learning about me? When my history books taught that I only came from slavery. When my mathematics classes left out Black contributions. When my science classes left out our contributions to evolution. When our history classes talk about America's hopes and intentions, but didn't lift my hopes by teaching me about Black inventions. You don't think that I felt guilty like 3/5 of a man when y'all taught me that I was only civilized when y'all brought me to this land? So really, at the end of the day, we're doing all of this stuff to protect white kids, but white kids can handle the truth. But those who are not white, those who are particularly Black and brown, we've always been taught negative history about our culture and society, but nobody gave a damn about us. And so the fact of the matter is, we got to speak up. And lastly, in Florida, you also see that they got rid of AP psychology because of its LGBTQ issues that they had.
Yes,
so white parents out there who aren't speaking up right now, your whole school system, your college aspirations for your children are being jeopardized when you're not speaking up for us now. It's just a matter of time before they come for the other courses that your kids are interested in. So you might as well join us now, because it's just a matter of time before your whole college aspirations for your kids get messed up and there are no AP classes that teach about anything.
Dr. DeBing, I wanted to stay with you for a moment because I am sure that as a teacher, you hear from other teachers. What's the sense around how they're feeling about these limitations and the 44 states that have passed legislation about AP? And is there any fear or sense of fear in them? Because there have been teachers that have lost their jobs for showing a movie, for example, that was on a list of approved movies. What is your gathering of information in terms of how teachers are feeling these days where you are?
There's absolutely fear and anger. I was in Florida recently working with teachers and librarians, and there's places I'm speaking, they're crying, they're angry. And, of course, they're angry and concerned about job loss and the like, but they're also literally concerned about their students and what they can't share with them. And it's not just these red states. In Maryland, I had a teacher say that now that parents feel so emboldened, a teacher literally came up to him and said, can you not teach about the bad guys like Malcolm X? Teach about the good guys like Dr. King. And felt emboldened to say those things. And these are in schools where teachers were teaching their history regularly with no problems. So all of a sudden, they don't feel like they're being supported. In my book, I have a whole chapter on critical race theory. As Dr. Malveaux said, it's not being taught in schools. But one of the things that teachers are always saying, if we're teaching kids to stand up to bullies, we got to stand up to the bullies too. And that's why more teachers are speaking out and protesting, and they need our support.
Renita, what are some of the solutions here? How do we go about making sure that history is taught? As you already said, it was already taught when you were growing up, and it's safe to assume that a lot of people would understand that you have to kind of fill in some blanks. But what do we do with these school systems that have such a large gap in the teaching process?
Well, as a former elected official, I'm going to talk to you about what people can do from the political side. And so that is, number one, make sure you're voting and you're knowing when you have school board races, because those are the folks whose actual job it is to stand up and make sure that the curriculum reflects what should be taught. You also want to, and those folks also, by the way, help in selecting the superintendent for every county. And so the superintendent is the person who ultimately is controlling what curriculum looks like within school districts. And so everybody has got to make sure to start paying attention to these school board races, make sure that if you don't see what you want to see represented, and that somebody who's willing to stand up and say that we need accurate Black history taught, then you yourself consider running for school board. The other thing that folks can do as well is make sure to stop voting for people who want to just highlight this issue, because at the end of the day, fighting over what is going to be taught in schools does not allow you to pay your bills better. These are not the basic things that should be at the top priority of what any elected official is working on. And so what this is really just another cultural war niche issue that the Republicans are using, hoping to really gin up their base, for the base of the folks that actually care about this. And to get them out to vote. And so at the end of the day, every person who votes and pays taxes should be mad about this, because this is not what you send elected officials to do, which is ruin education for children. That's not what you vote for. I don't believe anybody votes for that, and nobody votes for this to be anybody's top priority.
Dr. Malveaux, do you expect to hear this particular topic, I would imagine, on Thursday's debates?
It will come up, absolutely, because it's become a wedge issue and it shouldn't be. Renita is right. We don't have elected officials. These are people are not experts in any kind of education, but it'll come up because they've turned it into a wedge issue, because Ron DeSantis has made it an issue in Florida, where basically they've taken away the AP. I have a former faculty member who actually took a job, I begged him not to, at the University of Florida, and they sent him a letter after he accepted the job saying he can't use the term diversity, equity, or inclusion in his classroom. This is an ethnic studies professor. I don't know how he's going to be able to do his and to get, but he had to sign this piece of paper. They gave him a huge raise, so I kept saying, "Dude, you're not going to be happy there." But I hooked him up. He can come back in a year if he wants to. And
right, keep that door open.
I bet that he will want to. The thing that's really going on here is that they changed this Chris Ralph, I think his name is Chris Rufo. He's among those who basically are fighting against affirmative action, bringing lawsuits against private companies who want to do affirmative action type initiatives, and now dealing with the whole education piece and talking about what can be taught in schools. Renita's right. We have to revive our Saturday schools. Parents have to do what they're doing because who said, was an African philosopher who said, you cannot let the master or you can't let the oppressor teach the children how to think. And understanding that we don't run school boards, we may be on them, but my last thing I would say though is I am very frustrated with academics, with professors of ethnic studies, Black studies, Latino studies. Those are the folks who need to be out there. I am frustrated with these Black folks, even K through 12 teachers. Now, they have a lot to lose, but why can't we educators push back on these people and say, oh, hell no? I mean, we're the ones who are in the classrooms. We see the young people. We see what they want to know. Omokongo talked about the young lady. Said, that's my street. She had to be totally stricken to realize that lynching took place on her street. So if educators are not willing to stand up, ignorant people, Sarah Huckabee Sanders probably couldn't read a curriculum, much less adhere to one. But if ignorant people take over education, they'll teach what basically promotes their myth. And the only reason why we use terms like white supremacy, which I try not to use, is because a system was set up to reinforce the inferiority of Black people. And that included the education system. We cannot have that. We must fight back on that. And professors, teachers, you see this day to day. Y'all have to be part of the resistance.
Yeah, and you're right. The teachers are in the classrooms. They have the power. They're the ones who are actually in that moment teaching, and they are in charge of what they actually end up saying in that classroom. I also think the parents have a responsibility in that too.